Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and this is episode 282, where we're going to be talking about creating opportunities and maximizing your time. When we think of creating opportunities for our games, we often don't realize or consider how time is actually a key factor in how opportunities present themselves. So when processes aren't established or adapted to maximize time efficiency, it can be very difficult to identify opportunities or ways to avoid costly risks. Thankfully, Tim Beaudet of Tyre Bytes shares how his mindset and processes help him avoid risks and take advantage of opportunities just by being mindful of his time costs. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today with us I have Tim Beaudet. Tim, how's it going, buddy?
It's going great.
That's awesome to hear. Really excited to have you on the show today. Tim here is from Tyre Bytes, which is a game developer, a game studio essentially. But Tim, I'll let you take it from there, introduce yourself, tell us what you do for Tyre Bytes, and then also take a moment to kind of share what do you do in your personal life? What kind of things do you do to relax and unplug when you're not making games?
So I'm the owner of Tyre Bytes, and I do the programming, design, some art, some marketing, and pretty much everything for creating racing games of the future. We released Accelerate in 2021, which is the first of hopefully many, but we'll see how the adventure takes us. And I also wind up live streaming my entire workday, basically every day.
Wow.
Showing the ins and outs of indie developer life while trying to motivate and inspire others to chase dreams while knowing there are risks involved.
Cool. That's really awesome you do that. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So I also, when I'm not actually streaming or doing my game development stuff, which does take up a fair bit of my time, I like to go out hiking and just enjoying nature and basically shutting off technology and just getting away from it for a while, because that's the best way to relax just at the top of a mountain, chilled out with a view, listening to the birds.
Yeah, I can relate with that, especially I live fairly close to the White Mountains here in New Hampshire, and yeah, it just takes you to a good place and probably one of the best places to unplug. Not to mention, I'm seeing a common theme here with a lot of recent guests too, that like going outside and really being able to unplug from tech and everything else is really good. So I love that you're doing that. And folks, I'm seeing a trend here. So maybe if you don't do that, or if you're able to do that, should consider doing it. So, well, anyways, Tim, you're here with us today. Thanks so much for sharing that. But would love to get to know you a little bit more in a very random way. So that's why we're going to put you through the Q Box round, which is simply a series of random questions that I prepared here for Tim, if you're not familiar with that round already. But Tim, are you ready for the Q Box round?
Absolutely.
All right. What's your favorite sports team?
Probably Red Bull Formula One team.
Ooh, Formula One. I was not expecting that. Okay. If you could speak only one word for an entire day, what would it be?
Zoom. Zoom.
Love
Zoom,
it.
like a race car, you know?
Yes. That's awesome. I was thinking, not like the platform for communicating with.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, on that front, zoo or aquarium?
Aquarium with glass tunnels so I can see the fish and walk under them.
Oh, I've yet to be or to have gone to any of those style of aquariums, and it's like a dream of mine. But yes, absolutely. Planes, trains, or automobiles?
How about race cars?
I will take it. Wow, I see an ongoing theme here. All right, and then last but not least, the staple here on the show is what game are you playing now?
I play iRacing. It's basically a race simulator that brings me as close to the racetrack as I can get right now with a budget.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds pretty sick. I'm not familiar with it, but is it essentially a simulator, right?
Yeah, it's a simulator where it's really immersive with the you want to race as if you're racing in real life. You don't want to be crashing people out or you don't have turtle shells to fire and take the lead, you know.
Understandably so. But that's pretty sick though. Okay, cool. Well, Tim, thanks so much for providing these answers and allowing us to get to know you a little bit better. Definitely interesting, and again, we now get a much better feel, I think, in terms of where you really stand on the love for racing and what you do with your work. So that's pretty cool. All right. With that said, we're going to get right into the discussion topic here, folks, which is creating opportunities and maximizing your time. And yeah, it's a little bit of a different topic than what we typically cover here on the show, but I got to tell you, there's a lot of insight that I'm excited to uncover here with Tim. So why don't we just kick it off with, we all know that time costs and opportunity costs are kind of like or definitely super important and essential to be mindful of, and they also can kind of relate to each other, right? So, Tim, my question for you is, how is it that you differentiate these two things when you're running your studio?
Um, Basically, I take it as I don't pay too much attention to the opportunity cost all that much when running my studio. That was a before I started. I was asking myself, is the cost of this opportunity going to be worth it to me? And just as a recap for those that might not know what opportunity cost is, it's basically what you would give up to do one opportunity versus another. So, in doing an indie career versus a regular game developer or software developer career, when you're in the game developer or software career, you're probably making 100,000, maybe 120,000, maybe more money per year, and so your year would have like $120,000 that you could possibly make from that career. And as an indie game developer, you're not likely to make that much money unless you got some pretty good hit games going or you've got something really running for you. And so that's kind of what you're giving up is what you think you'd be able to make as an indie game developer versus what you can actually make as a in the career. And then when it comes down to time costs is what it actually costs you to spend that time. And I relate that to your cost of living. So every month you've got your bills to pay, your rent and your electricity, your internet, and all the other bills of regular life. And you take that figure. For me, it's about $3,000 after taxes. Um, or no, $3,000 before taxes for me. I've actually found a way to lower my cost of living enough that that's basically what a month will cost me. And it does sacrifice a bunch, but that's okay for me. It might not be for you or different scenarios. Like this cost varies from person to person, but you take your cost of living and you convert it into basically an hourly rate, a weekly rate. It kind of gets a little fudgy when you get down to the hourly rate because it's not like you can put more hours in and increase or lower that cost per hour.
Hmm.
But knowing that will allow you to know that every hour you spend on running your studio, your business, has an actual cost associated with it. For me, it's about $16 an hour. That is not what I value my time at, which is different than both the opportunity and time costs. I would be charging somebody more money than $16 an hour to work for them. But that is what the time will actually cost me to work 1 hour for my adventure, right? Like if I don't work an hour, I've basically still spent that $16, whether it was productive or not. It's just what the time will cost me as an indie developer. I need to find a way to make that money to keep living.
Yeah, I absolutely love this breakdown and way of looking at things so objectively. And again, the mindset behind this is, I think, can be very empowering, and it can really change kind of like how you see things in focus. One thing I want to call out too is as well, which I think would be a good segue to our conversation too, is like, as you called out, okay, $16 an hour, and that could be me doing nothing for an hour. If, let's say, something else comes up because of the whole, let's say, your whole monthly living expenses, let's call that the project. um, Other factors can pop up or whatever, and let's say there's 3 hours that you didn't do something because of something else, a doctor's appointment, what have you. Now you can start seeing those kind of costs like add up. So now it's, if you look at overall, you're looking at maybe percentages of certain activities that can do all the things. So again, I just absolutely love how you're able to break this down, and why I think our conversation today is so valuable because of this really mindset and interesting mindset and how to approach things, where it might be a bit much from a lifestyle perspective for some people, but man, does it really get you kind of in a good position to better look at the type of work that you're doing and how you're doing it. So, with that in mind, I would love to kind of like shift, and as I kind of like went into this a little bit, I would love to get a better sense of like kind of time cost evaluation. So, we know that, how much time it takes a project to complete, or having that idea or estimate is, obviously really important. So, I would say, to what level do you go to identify the time costs in terms of the cost it takes for a project to be completed, and based on the description you provided?
Um, so basically, as I calculated my time cost from the cost of living, and I chunked that down to the number of working hours that I want to put into a month. So yes, sometimes that might include the unexpected doctor appointment, or you're going to your car mechanic. Like sometimes that does happen during a work day or whatever, but generally it's the 8 hour workday, 5 days a week is what I kind of aim for, though it often is a whole lot more hours than that, and that's okay by me, but it is just what I'm aiming for. Um, and so what I wind up doing is whenever I'm spending time on a project, and I generally have several different projects happening at once. I stream my game development, as I was saying earlier, and every now and then there's something I do that's special on stream, so that gets some part of the budget. If I did something specific for that, like create a new overlay or did a community reward or something like that, some of that time needs to get tracked under the streaming project.
Hmm.
Whereas Accelerate would, if I was working on a new feature or piece of content there, I would track that time under that project. So effectively, what I do is I work for a handful of hours. Sometimes it's 8 hours in a chunk, and sometimes it's only like half an hour or an hour. Like it doesn't matter how big the chunk of time is, but when I'm finished with the project that I'm tackling, I enter into a spreadsheet how long that just took and what project it was for. I also tend to track what type of developer hat I was wearing. Was I a programmer, an artist? Was I trying to do marketing? Was it business or project management? Like, what sort of hat was I wearing during that task? Just to have an idea of where I'm balancing my time, which comes in handy later for like, are you developing too much or marketing too much, or
Hmm.
how do you balance all of this stuff out? And is there something you can learn from it later? Um, So that's basically how I do it. I that there's obviously a part of estimating it, and I can't talk very much about estimating other than the very general rule of thumb is to take what you think it's going to take you and then multiply it by three.
Hmm.
But I find that rule to be somewhat vague and bogus in itself because you're just taking a guess and then you multiply it by three. And yes, things might go wrong, but sometimes my guesses are already inflated too high, and then sometimes they're not. And I can't tell you that from the beginning. I don't know. Estimating is a very, very good skill that I'm still practicing.
And again, this I think from your perspective too, doing a lot of the work yourself. There's no real rule of thumb, essentially, right? Um, or I mean, there might be certain tasks you could get to that point, but it's still hard to really gauge. Whereas if it's a, let's say, a much larger team size or whatever, it could potentially get down to that. But again, it's really hard, like you said, hard to pinpoint.
Yeah, I think it's also the nature of technology and game development as being very iterative. Like
Mm.
you don't know when you're going to find the fun. You could be there for just a weekend in a game jam and spark an amazing amount of fun. That's what happened with Accelerate. Accelerate wasn't meant to be a product until I just found such a solid, fun idea that it turned itself into a product. Um, but then you could also just spend months trying to find that fun and never get it dialed in. So it's very much in the air.
So I like this a lot too because you bring up a really interesting point that I'd love to dive in a little bit more. Is simply here we are taking kind of a very analytical or pragmatic approach to time costs and such. But and while you're talking about estimation, um, I think another important factor is simply you're saying like, hey, look, it also depends on the fun you're having with it. Like, where's the motivation? Is there motivation backing the task at hand or whatever? Because sometimes, in terms of, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more too, in terms of learnings and where to be more efficient, if you got that motivation and drive and it's on task in terms of the overall project, then go with that because like you said you were just doing something you found that there's a lot more fun with it, and then ultimately it led to productizing it opposed to if or putting it out there on the market, but opposed to if it wasn't as fun, it could have maybe been a hindrance if you just kept pushing yourself and focusing on those areas. So I love that you called that out, and I don't know if there's anything else on that front that you shared that was interesting, maybe a specific another specific example, or something like that, because again I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, there had been times. So at the particular time that I made Accelerate, um, I was actually exploring Unity for the month of April, and it was partially for my stream, partially because I wanted to learn the tool set and see what I could apply to my own engine. For those that don't know, I actually developed my own game engine instead of using Unity or Unreal. At least I have nothing against using an engine. I feel like people should use whatever works for them. But I just wanted to explore the tool set and see if there's any tools I can bring over and help my own workflow. And so while exploring Unity, I did Ludum Dare, and I was actually going to look into using Unity to build a asset or a tool for the Unity ecosystem, and see if selling that to people using Unity would be a good way for me to increase business. That was the whole objectives behind the month of April in 2020, actually. And when the game jam came up, thankfully it was early in the month of April. I wound up getting first, or it, not first, but in the top 1% of fun, which is the highest I've ever had. And that's out of like 2,000 games. So it was a
Hmm.
pretty high remark on how fun the actual core idea was. And so instead of going with the route of making tools and assets for the Unity asset store, I pivoted that into let me make this game and wound up releasing it much later to a bunch of players. And um, yeah, that was, I think, one of those pivotal points that just having a full understanding and kind of reflecting as you go, being unafraid to pivot to something that has more promise is um, is very valuable. Like I could have sat there and stuck with, let me go make an asset for the tools, or asset or tool for the asset store, and I could have said, ignore the fact that this game is fun because that's the way my original plan was. But being open to those changes, I think, is really important to growing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I love how you called out even specifically to what led you to focus on that. Again, it comes, like you said, it comes down to looking at maybe what those opportunities are, and just kind of pivoting a little bit, which is really helpful. And it seems like too that throughout the years and the processes you have developed with this focus on kind of like time cost evaluation, you are able to probably, I would say maybe even more quickly, identify these opportunities opposed to not. So yeah, no, sorry, just really interesting to see like what that process was like for you and how important being adaptable and focusing on the fun is can be just as important, if not potentially more so, than really drilling down into the numbers all the time and being like, what's this going to be, and estimations and everything, all that. And again, I think it reveals too that even with something as focused and analytical in its approach, there's still like kind of a creative process behind it too, to some degree.
Oh, there's definitely a creative process. I would also like to stress just a little bit on where the fun is. So it doesn't necessarily, just in case somebody's listening to this and I don't want them to think that 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 it's about having fun during development. This
Mm-hmm.
is like as an indie game developer, I'm guessing you're having fun making games, but it's not always about your own having fun developing things. Right now, actually, I'm developing part of a product that isn't so much fun for me to develop, but it's very important and critical for the future of other products for me. And I understand that from the time cost scenario because if basically I'm working on two products in tandem. I got a racing simulator that I'm trying to build, which is going to take very, very long to build. And if I release this and I don't have an audience at the end of that development cycle, I won't be able to make money and I won't be an indie anymore.
Mm.
And I would prefer to continue making money and being able to stay an indie developer. So to ensure that I have an audience there, I'm developing a second product that will capture the correct audience at like a very highly interested in what I'm developing audience, right? Like not just people that like racing games, but specifically people that want a realistic racing game.
Mm.
And so this much smaller product, I don't really want to be working on it right now. I want to focus on my simulator. I like that's where my fun is right now as a developer. But I got to get this other little thing out first so that I can start building that audience and trust with that audience so that they can come over. And time cost wise is there's a balance there. Like I'm not to be spending a lot of time in this smaller product. It's actually not even there to make money specifically. It's there to gather the audience. Um, but that has a very valuable and measurable impact on the end result. And if I waited too long for it, it won't have built the audience that I need.
Mm. So, and it's really interesting too because, and again, everyone I know, and this is kind of why we opened with the kickoff question too. Like, to some degree, at least how I'm interpreting this, what you're talking about too also kind of overlays into the some of the opportunity costs in terms of like timing on some of these things and being strategic with your work and how it's being done. Because, like you said, Is this game ultimately going, this other project you're working on ultimately going to make you money, or if much? I mean, at face value, no, but a core element of it is letting it get in front of, getting the right audience for it, to kind of like prepping up the other project, and in this case the more fun one. And again, it's really interesting to look at these time costs aspect of things, and also how those kind of relate to the opportunity to really hone in and be strategic with how your development really plays in with everything that you do. And I don't know, you tell me. I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily look at this from this type of perspective, and it could just simply be a variety of reasons, what their main objective is and things like that. But I mean, what do you think is the general consensus when people are looking at their time spent on certain projects, and how it can actually be more of a strategic overall play compared to just looking at a single project?
I have found a lot of people that are um, making games. The word indie developer is very overused
Hmm.
and means different things to so many different people. It could mean hobbyist, and it could mean somebody that's approaching it as a business. And I am not going to say somebody calling themselves an indie developer, even if they're a hobbyist, is wrong. They're not. No matter what, like you're trying to make games and probably trying to sell them. But what I have noticed I've read a lot of different post-mortem failures or even successes, and just lots of this is what I've attempted to build my game and get it out into the public. And I think that one of the key areas, and this is actually why I started tracking my time, um, one of the key differences was how people approach it as a business. And a very large percentage of indie developers, as a very broad term in classifying all of it, um, just kind of feels like I want to work on my project and I want it to do it this way. And it doesn't matter to me if I'm making my sales, or it doesn't matter to me really anything, how I'm spending my time. I just want to have fun creating my thing. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But then later on in the post, it's like my game didn't succeed because I just wanted to have fun. And I think there's another percentage that's thrown around very often. 95% of indie developers fail to make a profit. And I don't know what indie developers stand for in that particular percentage. Running a small business is really hard. Like, it doesn't matter if you're making indie games as your business, or if you're a farm stand selling food as your business. Running a small business is really hard. A lot of them fail. Um, but if but if you go into it with like the mindset of it doesn't matter how I spend my time, it's just fun for me. How can you make the right decisions to make sure you can keep having that fun?
Hmm.
I don't really care about the business analytics and looking through my time cost as much as most people probably don't care about these analytics, as far as it's boring work. It's You got to sit there and you kind of got to enter in the entry every day, and then at the end of the month, I'll look back at what I've actually achieved, what my goals for the next month are, and more importantly, with what I've achieved and how much time I've spent and where I've spent that time, what can I learn from that last month of experience to make next month more effective and more likely to reach a goal where I'm making money that I can continue this. Because yes, making my games is fun overall. There
Hmm.
are times when it's not. It's all any job is going to have good and bad times. But overall, how can I keep doing this? And to do that, I need money. Does that answer the question a little bit?
Oh no, it does greatly and goes into a lot of different areas, but that I would love to just go into, but we're short on time for what's going on in my head right now. But
Right.
one thing I'm curious though, which you brought up, which is kind of about like, you know, when you're going through this process and reviewing things and kind of going through the learnings and stuff. What I'm curious about, because again, this is really important, and it helps when you're tracking this information and then looking back, reassessing. But when you're doing this, let's say, review process, what type of questions do you ask so you can better understand how efficiently your time is spent on a project or just in general?
Um, so it's actually quite challenging. And I can give you a real quick overview of what I do. So every month I'll go through and I'll just grab the numbers from my sheets. I also track my income, the expenses, and where I spent um, money, right? So I'll grab the actual hard values and paste them into my little review sheet that I'm going through. This is just getting your brain started on the thing, and you don't have to think at all when you're doing that. It's just the data that you've already collected. You plug it into a different sheet.
Hmm.
And as you start going through this, then you go through your previous goals for the month and did you achieve them? Did you work towards them? Did you completely ignore them? Right. And that kind of starts not nudging things in your brain and getting things going towards the right direction. Now, because often this is kind of the same as your goals, but it's not really because you might have done more than just your goals in the month. So you just went through what you set out to do, and maybe you changed direction during that month entirely, but then you go through what you've achieved. And this could be something like I recorded 3 YouTube videos or I ran a play test. And perhaps those were actually goals as well for the previous month, and you already covered them. So it's maybe a little doubled. But once you've gone through that, you have an idea of all the things that you've actually finished and moved forward with. You can start asking questions of what lessons did I learn? This is the hardest question to answer, and it takes a lot of practice. But find some challenges that you faced during the month, whatever they might have been. It might have been something with a piece of software. It might have been something on the I spent 10 hours doing this thing and it was actually a huge time sink. I could have actually spent that time more effectively knowing this. And sometimes that's a hindsight's 2020 thing. So try to figure out and guess what could you do back then to have seen 2020 vision and made the choice before spending that 10 hours on the time sink. And sometimes you can't do that, but going through that thought process will allow you to see if you can learn something new. Um, and then the next set of questions is also quite hard for me to answer is like, did the month meet your expectations? Why or why not? Did the month move you closer to financial freedom, which is basically being able to live off the money that's coming in? Why or why not? And the most important question, which I've only ever answered no to once, and I don't want that to be a habit, is there anything you would do differently? And I don't think no is a good answer here, which
Hmm.
is why it's only ever happened once. I think you should always be striving to do something differently unless the month went flawlessly, which has happened to me pretty much that once.
Hmm.
Um, like there's always something to improve on. And that's the whole reason I go through this process is to find those little nuggets of what can you do better and try that next month. Put that in your goals for the next month. How can you make that happen? How can you step towards being better? And I think that's the biggest thing that people could take away from that time cost is throwing it down this whole review and getting to the end of how you can improve your efficiency and your whole workflow from like just looking at it and asking those questions, really.
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely amazing. And again, going through that process, and I mean just from everything that you're possibly learning about yourself, about the work, about everything that you do is I'm sure exceptionally helpful. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who probably don't go to that level. And sometimes I admit that even myself with my own business, don't necessarily always strive to focus on like those same types of questions or review process, or at least something similar to that. So again, it seems really awesome to go through that process, and it might be, a little bit of getting used to, or in terms of especially creating that habit, because you do this monthly typically, correct?
I do this every month since 2018, and it did take a bit to get into the habit. As I said, also asking what have I learned this month is
Mm.
a very hard question to answer. It is a challenging one. You got to zoom out and in, and you just kind of got to take a guess. And some months the learnings are like okay, but as you get better with it, you can get way more insightful
Mm.
learnings. I've canceled a project because of this process.
Mm.
I canceled a project because the time cost on the project was starting to exceed. I think it was like 15 to 20,000 dollars of actual work at that point in time, and I wasn't even halfway through.
Yep.
And and while I enjoyed that project, especially in that particular moment, and it was a really hard decision to come to, by doing these reviews and knowing that this project is costing something around $20,000 and it's going to take another 20, maybe even $30,000 to get it completed the way I'm seeing it. Am I going to be able to make 40 or $60,000 from this project at the end? Given where I am today, the answer was very much very unlikely. You got to build an audience over time. It doesn't just come up with one thing. And maybe if you've got a lot more in the marketing background than I do, because I'm more of a developer and I'm still learning the marketing side, um, maybe a more marketing background could have had more confidence and said, yeah, $46,000 is pretty good if we got the good product. So let's make that happen. But I didn't have that confidence there yet, right?
Mm.
I'm confident that my research has said I could probably make around 15, maybe $20,000 off small racing games. So I need to try keeping the project cost down. And this whole process has, I think, saved my adventure more than once, or at least saved me from very big time, costly and um, yeah, costly mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing too is that you're kind of calling out to here a little bit is, I mean, especially with studios or solo developers, or anyone for that matter, coming out with a first project, um, or even just a few projects. If you're investing too much of these types of costs, they could potentially really sink the whole thing as a whole. I know I've talked to other developers too in studios that's kind of one of their big pain points, even after they have a few titles under their belt, is like, hey, look, if one thing that's going to be really hard for our studio to survive is if we have a game invest all this time and energy into a game that ends up being a flop, because it's really hard to recover from those things. So I love it how you just walked us through how your processes essentially help potentially save that from happening. I mean, I don't know exactly what your situation was, and that's okay. But the point being is just making that call, and maybe if there was other confidence factors, it could have been a different story. But ultimately, the process made you feel confident in making the right call, even though it was a hard one to make.
It was a very hard one to make. It was not what I wanted to make for a call, but it did give me the confidence I made the right call. Yeah.
Nice. So with this in mind, I want to shift the subject, but kind of like keeping the same theme here. So again, with this process and everything, you found that, okay, look, I made the right call. It looks like it saved me from making potentially a big mistake. So, but on the flip side of that, how else would you say that, I mean, at least like, what are some of the benefits that you've found that have come from, your time cost assessments and reviews?
What other benefits besides just
Like it
trying to avoid the traps?
Yes, exactly. Like, have there been anything else that you have found that's beneficial um, outside of avoiding the traps?
Um, it's that's a hard one to answer, I guess. It feels like everything that I've learned would have been kind of avoiding a trap in some way. So
Okay.
obviously with the project I canceled, I was avoiding a trap of releasing a giant project that would have cost way more than I was likely to make, or at least that I was confident I could make. So that avoided that trap. And then in other situations, it's kind of the same thing on different levels. It's not necessarily always canceling a project, but it could be with like focusing yourself to finish a project earlier.
Mm.
Um, like with Accelerate, I made a mistake, and I kind of this last year I meant to be developing for a month. Excuse me. I meant to be developing for a month and then marketing for a month. And that was the actual game plan with the time costs effectively separated as 1 month for development, 1 month for marketing. But I slid right over it. And this process is supposed to kind of help with that. And it did help with it significantly. But I also had to make the choice of, do I continue finishing up what I'm working on, developing it still, or do I start marketing a project that is just not quite there to be marketed? And the thing that I came up with in that moment in time when doing these reviews is I can't market a product that doesn't exist. So I'm going to have to push back my marketing, even though that's not ideal in this whole business. It really isn't ideal. But if you don't have a product, there's no point in marketing it.
Mm.
Um, so I wound up letting the development slide a little longer than I wanted to. And then after the whole project, I did a more thorough examination of what exactly led to that moment. And I did learn more. But sticking with the time cost analysis, the objective was to break it into sensible pieces that made sense to me, and kind of block me in so I would finish all the features within a set amount of time and keep that time cost low, and then have the time dedicated for marketing later. I just myself wound up sliding on the barriers that I had set up. And if those barriers weren't even there, imagine what would have happened. I would have spent probably 2 or 3 months just in development mode and completely missed everything.
Yeah. And I mean, I also think in to some way, shape, or form, and this is just my own perspective, that like it's almost like you can view this two ways. Because again, I think this is another good example of, hey, how you avoided a potential trap, right? But at the same time, it wasn't necessarily just a trap of getting caught, let's say, focusing too much on marketing when it really wasn't needed for that particular time. But but it also, in that sense, again, I think you could look at this two ways. Presented the opportunity of, hey, look, there's going to be greater return on my time investing on the project right now. I mean, the development right now, opposed to the marketing. So it's just like it's. I think it's interchangeable there, and I think that's completely fine. And each scenario and everything is going to be unique in its own way. But Yeah, I just find it really interesting how you can see it either way, but it's regardless of looking out for traps or looking for other opportunities where you can do a lot more, be more efficient in certain areas. Ultimately, it's a benefit regardless.
I definitely agree.
Because it's so it's funny because even with it, with what it sounds like your process being so very focused and set, like a set of standards that you abide by and follow, it's still very dynamic because of the way just development and everything else works.
Yeah, game dev itself is very iterative and changes day to day. I actually do these reviews on stream the first Sunday of every month,
Mm.
and so many commenters come in and be like, "Is this worth your time? Like, why do you spend these?" It takes me usually 3 hours. Sometimes it's two, but it's typically a 3 hour process for me. Um, and that 3 hours is so small over the whole amount of a month that yes, it saves me so much. Like those are probably the most valuable 3 hours I spend.
Wow. And you know what? It's really funny because, like, you're right. That is such a big valuable part of how you're able to do what you're doing and knowing these things. And I get it. I mean, and I'm sure you get it too. People from the outside perspective might just look at this like, wow, how could I sit down here right now and do this 3 hours? But the fact that you share that process is awesome. But on the flip side too, not only is it valuable for you, but when, I don't know if you did this by design or not, but by streaming this and going through this process and sharing it with others, that's some serious accountability. So if you have a certain like amount of people that are looking for this and you don't deliver on one day, that means you didn't do your review session, which means how is that going to affect your project? But I don't know. You
Streaming
tell
in
me it
general
was.
has a yeah, streaming in general has a very big accountability factor for me.
Mm,
It's effectively what kickstarted my indie adventure. Even when I had a full-time job, I was doing 3 hours every morning, and that time has never changed. I actually stream more now that I am a full-time indie developer, but it's a um, streaming gives me that I said I was going to be here. I should be here. I should be doing this, and I should be focused on moving my game dev business forward because that is the content of my stream is the day in the life of a indie developer effectively. Um, and yeah, it is something that every month there it is. It's the 3 hours of what did I learn? How can I do better next time? What are we going to focus on next month? And it just takes a little bit of thought. It is kind of slow sometimes, and I understand the outside perspective of uh, is this worth it? Why do you do it? I When I started the process, I didn't like it. Okay, I was like, I'm just gonna make myself do this for a few months just to see how I enjoy it and if I get anything from it. And literally within months, I was seeing the benefit to like, yeah, I'm learning stuff. I can look back and see the bigger picture. Um, and then about 6 months into starting that review is when I canceled that project and seriously saved myself from spending another year on a project that probably wasn't going to go anywhere.
it's amazing too because while you were saying that and how you started the process up and how much you hated it, because I think a lot of times where people are asking the questions, oh, should I have like a YouTube channel or should I do streaming? And everything I think is led from the perspective of a marketing perspective. And hey, there could be benefits to that or not by devoting time for that reason. But approaching it differently, I think, if anyways, and would love to hear your thoughts real quick too, where clearly there's way more value in doing this from simply a development standpoint for almost for you personally, but then even though the audience is obviously going to be a bit different compared to who you're marketing to or making the game for,
Yes.
There could be other potential that comes out of these channels, but again, if that's the case, that's kind of gravy, right? But the focus and intent of the channel was as basically a means and a mechanism to develop what you have developed, and why we're here talking today.
Yeah. I So when I started streaming and also my devlog on YouTube, I was naively thinking that those were marketing channels. And I
Hmm.
say naively thinking because that's how I approached it. I'm going to tell people about what I'm working on every week, and they're going to eventually fall in love with the project, yada yada. I don't know where the idea was there, but I've learned through time, lots of time, that I do not consider my YouTube channel or my Twitch channel to be marketing um, efforts in really any way. While that might have been where my head was at when I first started those things, it's just not what it is. As you mentioned, you're you're not talking to the right audience. Yes, there are some game developers that will enjoy and buy and play your games. That will happen, but it's not game players. Game developers want game development. And that's the content they want. They want to know how you're solving some problems or how you're like I think one of the biggest things that you could learn in marketing, I know you didn't ask this question, but it's coming up right now and um, it's really important and something I learned pretty late was know your audience. And I know you've probably heard that before.
Yep.
But what it really means is actually know who you're talking to. And if you're making a YouTube channel, who is going to watch it? And try, I'm trying to fast forward somewhat like my old me, right? And it, it really took me a long time to figure out that doing the devlog thing is not going to attract the audience. I mean, you can be an entertaining YouTuber and you can make an audience there, absolutely. But and you can even make sales through all of that. That all is a valid thing when you get big enough. Percentages do add up when you're big enough. But is it who would actually play your game?
Right. And again, it's interesting because it's like it sounds like you kind of went that path too, but instead of just simply making the realization of, hey, this, probably isn't the right audience for uh, you know for my game and whatnot, but you found another way for it to benefit you, which again is just kind of interesting that you went through that process and made that discovery to a means where it's essentially now an effective tool to working towards this whole review and time cost savings aspect, which has definitely helped you in lots of ways.
Very much so, yes. I would say anyone that's looking to start streaming or something to see if it works for them, you just need a mic. You need to talk about what you're doing, and you need to be comfortable
Yep.
sharing what you're doing. That's actually kind of an important part. Like you need to be comfortable with that part of it because if you do want to keep it hidden, doing it on stream isn't going to work. Obviously, it's live. Um, but I have found that I wouldn't say it increases motivation. That's probably the wrong word, but it definitely has that accountability and
Mm,
it does help me focus, right? Like if I'm on stream and I'm going to go make a quick tweet or Reddit post or whatever it might be, I am there for that one job and then I'm out. And I'll go and respond to the comments on those things, but I'm there to respond to the comments and then I'm out. It's not like I fall into the trap of, oh, let me keep browsing this for the next 2 hours. No, I'm on stream. I got to remain focused. Like we get in, we get out and continue. And you don't fall into the pit traps nearly as much, which is the benefit to me.
yeah. Cool. It's so crazy how effective that can be and quick offshoot, I know that there's a lot of things out there. I think even like services where you can have like accountability, where you like do like, you're in virtual rooms basically where other people can kind of like watch you work or whatever, and you kind of like found your own way on that. And I think these are popping up quite regularly now, just that whole accountability aspect. But at any rate, really, really cool stuff, Tim. And before we close, because I know we're coming on time here, and I don't mean to be abrupt with this, because again, I mean, there's so many things here that we could talk about, I think, forever, because it's just so fascinating, and how this is so helpful to what we do as developers. But that said, I would love for you to share like either 3 suggestions or tips that you would recommend to our listeners today based off of our discussion.
I would suggest, if you're doing game development as a business, and I'm going to specify it as a business. If you're just making games fun, keep doing it the way you want. But as a business, figure out what your time costs you and track how much time you spend on various projects and such. And take the time every month to reflect on that data that you've gathered and ask yourself, how can you improve? And then the final thing would be, just keep trying, just keep learning, and just keep improving. It's a never-ending cycle.
Yeah, no, definitely great tips there, and a good summary of everything you shared with us today. So really appreciate that. And again, before we close, would love for you to kind of like share any links, resources. How can people get in touch with you, and where can we find more about Tyre Byte Games?
Basically, by following me on twitch.tv/Tim Beaudet and interacting with me live. I stream my entire game development adventure and wish to motivate and inspire other developers to chase their dreams while knowing the cost and risk involved. That would be the best place, I think.
Okay, cool. Well, Tim, I can't really thank you enough for doing what you do, and then also sharing your insights and stories with us today. So again, thanks for being here on the show.
Thank you for having me. It was a great discussion.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. If you enjoy and value the show's content, you can support us even more by going to Patreon and visiting www.patreon.com/IGM podcast and select the tier that best suits your needs. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.